Not that I had enough of my fellow refugees. On the contrary, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say it was their merciful solidarity that kept me alive during the first weeks and months of life in the camp. Some families allowed me to share their children's beds and their few spare items of clothing, so that at night, both their children and I slept naked as our clothes dried outside. Our limbs intertwined, sweat glued us together. And for a long time, before I had inherited my hut from a man who had drowned in the river, I slept in different hats and laid my hand on the same pillow as a poet, a rapist, a widow, an adulterer, a fantasist and compulsive liar, an imam, a homosexual, a priest, a closet transvestite, a man who molested his son, a mother who beat her children until her rage was engraved on their skins. And for a while, I dwelled with a young widow who spent her nights parked on the ground of her hut on all fours, surrendering her naked body to the ghost of her deceased husband. So I went to bed with the smell of her yearning sex filling my lungs. These people's dreams, their fears and crimes became mine. I lived wondering whether I would end up a dreamer, a wanderer between countries and lovers, or someone who would stalk a victim through dark alleyways, or whether I would be a man of words, or even be transformed by the might of the divine into a woman like Saba, whose moonlight-flooded curves I had pictured as my own. My adolescence was full of possibilities, of becoming this or that, captive to ambition that changed with each night I spent in a different hat and listened to the hearts of those laying their heads next to mine, their breaths awakening gruesome thoughts as well as sensuous and compassionate ones. I am nothing but the sum of the many thoughts of those companions, because unbeknown to them, I became many things, an image of their generosity, a case study for their noble creeds, and a barrier of their most unbearable secrets.
Thank you so much for that beautiful reading, Martha Fessehatzion. Thank you. Both intimate and epic, Sulaiman Addonia's extraordinary, subversive, and sensual second novel dissects society's ability to wage war on its own women and explores the stories we must tell to survive in a broken, inhospitable world. Welcome, Sulaiman.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here because I think it's the first time I took the plane, and you know, it's so good to see so many people. I think collectively we've been through a lot, and you know, the other day someone asked me a simple question like, "How are you?" And I felt like, really, it's like the most dense and emotional question you can ask someone at the moment, because I think we are all like in that kind of transit of being. So I'm really happy to be here and see friends and
And to see human beings moving around freely.
See human beings, my God.
Yeah. And before we begin, I want to say thank you so much to the volunteers that are making this possible. They've done a wonderful job.
I'm very obsessed with intimacy. I'm very obsessed with the details of human beings, relationships, and sex and sexuality and love and those kind of things that really move me and inspire me. And so, I immediately, one of the things that really attracted me about setting the story in a refugee camp was like, what does it actually do to people when they are forced to kind of live in a very confined space? What does it do to their mental being? But what does it do to their relationships? What does it do to their privacy? You know, what does it do to their idea of love and sexuality, you know? I mean, can you imagine being so close, living so close, day in, day out? Your definition, I'm definitely sure. I mean, the pandemic is one way of looking at it, like, you know, sticking or staying in the same, you know, tight space with somebody, with someone, day in, day out. And I think, and that's the kind of psychology that is really so interesting to kind of explore, but also at the same time, because it's the details, you know, and that's why it took time. I just want to say one thing about the inspiration for the book. I was in Paris in 2008 after I finished my first novel, and then I went to visit a museum, and I saw Degas painting a nude woman taking a bath, and you know, she was taking a bath in a bucket, which is what we used to do in a refugee camp. And I thought, like, I am going to paint a Habesha woman, you know, without clothes, with that kind of a stark nudity, that kind of a stark, the detail of the body, and that's the kind of, so art was really the inspiration behind the book.
And there's a huge level of tenderness and this intimacy in the depiction of this woman as well.
I think that comes, I mean, you know, people ask, I mean, you know, I've been listening to my fellow writers the past, from yesterday and today, and it's really fascinating to see how different we are in the way we think about literature, in the way we think about writing. And I think, for me, I am really unconscious when I am at my desk. I think my job is to actually prepare myself before I go and sit at my desk. And after that, I like to surrender to the story. And after that, it becomes about a journey, you know? And that's why in writing, there's that kind of element where you don't feel yourself anymore. You know, I was thinking, like, before coming here, because of the COVID test, I had to feel like, I don't know, you know, sometimes you do black, white, or other. And I think writers should also have books, because it's impossible for a writer to define themselves. Like, sometimes you're Jewish, sometimes you're Christian, sometimes you're a woman, sometimes you're a man, sometimes you're non-binary. The possibilities that as a writer you have to kind of imagine and embrace, it's so diverse that sometimes it's so daunting, but at the same time it's so freeing. And so tenderness is also elements of that kind of freedom that I think, you know, came to me when I was writing my sibling characters and the relationship between them. And, you know, the definition of tenderness itself, it takes really, it took a shape and a form that really, after looking back, it really surprised me. Yeah.
So we will come back to that sibling relationship,
Yeah.
and I'd like to ask you more in-depth questions about it. So the siblings that you're mentioning, first of all, are Saba and her brother Hagos.
Right.
And we also have Jamal, who narrates the opening
Right.
chapter
Right.
of your book.
Right.
And I find that the characters beautifully carry each other.
Right.
They all take up equal space in the story, but Jamal has an overview, which comes from the fact that he's set up a cinema of sorts in this space.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
You know, I love art house movies. I love Italian cinema, the golden era of Italian cinema. And, you know, Jamal, I actually found Jamal extremely difficult to write at the beginning. And you know, and one thing, you know, I also discovered that writing isn't just about pen and paper. It's about destroying all this kind of taboos that we carry in our head, you know, be it conscious or subconscious. And, you know, it's harder than actually writing the story, because what I found out was that I was becoming very judgmental of my characters, especially with someone like Jamal, who's got this kind of sexual fascination, sexual desires that were really difficult for me to write about without me saying, oh, what's going on here, right? And so what I did was I stepped outside of writing totally, and I started reading books, and I tried to kind of destroy the barriers that existed inside my head I felt that they were kind of making me judgmental. I wanted to make myself as primitive as possible, as someone who's not who hasn't got fear of taboos, someone who's who doesn't kind of have definition or box people into sexualities or gender or things like that. And I just kind of erase everything, and I really did that because when I came out, I found it difficult to have relationship with people without upsetting people, because I would talk about things and people would find it, there's no boundaries, and so I think for me, Jamal, and what allows Jamal in my mind to be free was art. I mean, Jamal is someone who would have an idea of sex, but he only practices that idea once he steps into his definition of what cinema is. And so, yeah, I know, writing is beyond the don't show, don't tell, those kind of, show, don't tell, those kind of things. It's deeper than that, and I think that's why it was necessary for me to go through that journey.
Thank you. So, just to give the audience a backdrop of what the cinema entails, I think that's important. Jamal has essentially cut a cinema-shaped screen, a hole in a white sheet, and set it up between two poles in this compound where he lives, right? And it's also it's partly to frame the life within this compound, but it's also for his personal desires and interest in Saba.
Right.
Is that right? So as much as he frames this, the film that he's watching wouldn't exist without the interactions that are happening on the other side of the screen.
Yeah, I mean, what he does is basically there's the refugee camp, and because he used to work in an Italian-built cinema before he fled to the camp, so he kind of set up his own idea of a cinema. So he, like he said, he erects these two poles, and then he cuts a hole, and through it he watches the people's day-to-day life, and but he's obsessed with Saba, and so he watches her doing things like what people do, read books, but he also watches her masturbating, going to the toilet. There's all this action, that she, and this is the interesting thing for me about Jamal is like, as art, we censor ourselves, we hear, we close and everything. But what Jamal looks at is what happens before you came to here, for example, fully clothed the way you are, and for that actually, it's, and that's what I was saying, like it was really difficult to write those scenes.
So if he is watching this minutiae of the life on the other side of the screen, how does his view differ from the voyeur, from the gaze of the voyeur?
I think that's a very interesting question, because maybe he is and maybe he isn't, I think for him, it was, finding this medium of cinema was a way to kind of, to continue the way he lived. And I think one thing about the book is, one thing about Jamal, when he came to the camp and he saw there was absolutely nothing in a refugee camp but an aid center, a river, and huts, and then he screams, and then somebody else say to him, no, wait, because absence inspires inventions, and that's what we human beings are. I mean, we've been confined for more than 2 years, but I think a lot of people you talk to, they found a new way of living, a new way of existing, a new way of making love maybe, or a new way of seeing the world, Maybe when we come out of this experience, we'll be reshaped and reimagined. And sometimes you need those kind of difficult moments to, to kind of go beyond the obvious and, and push yourself beyond the limit, and that's what Jamal is. So maybe he's a, like he said, but also it could be somebody who was pushed into what we human beings, I think we live maybe 1% of our possibilities in this life. We're too much constrained by ideas, by be it religions or philosophy or politics or borders, and and for Jamal, I think he, and I think being in a camp, creating this this idea, this invention of a cinema allows him actually to go beyond that, and and push And for me, he pushed me too. So I became a completely different person. I would say that I wrote this book, but actually this book rewrote me. So
In what sense do you find that it rewrote you?
I think I'm different Suleiman to how I used to be, you know. I'm really totally different person. I mean, and I think that's what I was saying. I have forever been pushed by this book to discover something else about myself more than, people been talking here about changing, whether literature changes the world. I really don't think it does. I think what literature does is it changes, whether writers can change the world. I think writers change themselves, And I think something Mahmoud Darwish had said in his poetry, the Palestinian poet, he's been writing poetry for 30 years, and he said, I've been writing poetry trying to change the world. And now that I'm older, I discovered that the only person that my poetry changed is me. And I think that's the power of literature because, like I said, as a man, I'm sitting at my desk, I'm writing this woman, or I'm writing this non-binary person, or writing this person who probably has kind of a different idea of sexuality than me. And if I don't go to kind of embrace what this person's life is, it's a bit like acting, you Martha is an actor here. And, it's a bit like that for me anyway. Like, I guess, like, when you play a character, then you really have to be them for you to, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's also, it's your decision how deep you allow yourself to go into that character or not.
Yeah. That's really interesting, right? Because for me, and that's why I was going to go just to the deepest possible level, And it's really, and that's why writing is so torturous, because you're just discovering new societies of new ideas, new possibilities, and you're challenging yourself constantly. If you want to get the best out of your characters, you really have to get the best out of yourself.
I think this is an example of beautiful outcome out of torture, which I think is a rare case.
Yeah.
So to come back to this relationship between Saba and Hagos, as a small hint, without spoiling the story of the book for you, for the audience, you write this part that Jamal sees through his screen. You write, ants climbed her toes, pedicured by Hagos the night before. And I find that's a very intimate detail that sort of captures the tone of their relationship. Can you tell us a bit more about their relationship?
So yes, absolutely. I mean, the story centers around Saba and Hagos. They're siblings. So Hagos is 6 years older than Jamal, and so when he started the school, it was discovered that he was mute. So his poor parents, pulled him out of school and invested whatever little money they had into the education of his sister. And so as a result, he grows up being mute and not being able to read or write. So the book is told from the perspective of Saba, and she feels that because she took his place in school, she feels responsible for the absences in his life, and also the absences not just of jobs, of friendship, but also of love and sex. And that's when the books takes a turn and takes you into that kind of really intimate side of the story. What happens, there is a situation here where Saba feels like Hagos isn't having sex, and she was responsible for that, And to me, one way of getting that side of the story was actually to live in the detail. I just love living the details. That's why it takes time. That's why it takes effort. That's why it takes a lot of energy. But I think the beauty is when you see, if there's a war happening around you, how is it possible to bring the attention from the bombs to that person who stands in front of you? I think it's all about that. It's all about how Hagos and Saba see each other in details, living in a refugee camp. And I think, so that's the kind of thing that allows you to kind of dive into the sea of details.
So Saba is a character who feels very deeply. And in times, like you said, she takes responsibility or feels responsible for Hagos not having the opportunity to experience those feelings. And the life of the camp in that particular context may be her setting, but it's not necessarily the entirety of her life, right? So much like the other characters, she has a rich inner life, and in her case, the need for pleasure is an important part of her existence. Right. So there's research on how trauma is inscribed in the body and the importance of movement and pleasure in untangling these knots. Right. What's the significance of pleasure in this book?
You know, it's really interesting because the first line I wrote in this book 10 years ago was like when Saba arrives, you know, they flee a war, she arrives in a refugee camp, and the first thing she does in the morning is masturbate. So I showed it to someone and they said, this is impossible, that someone just fled a war will dive into that possibility, you know. But I think, and I kept it because, you know, the whole idea is we are part of an ecosystem, you know, but the only thing we have is our bodies. The only thing we control is what happens within us. It's possible that there will be situation that influences our thinking, be it religious, be it philosophical, be it our relationship, but at the end of the day, everything that lives inside. I always feel like, yes, we live like here, we are in Germany, but actually we have a country inside us, you know. And that's the way, for example, Saba moved. Saba is this young woman, but Saba moved intact. Yes, of course the war like maybe killed her family, destroyed her school, took away a lot from her, but she moved intact in terms of her desires, in terms of fascination, the way she loves, the way she defines things. And so she becomes really this determined individual who comes to the camp and exercises this self-pleasure. It's nothing showy, there's no message behind this, she's just being herself, wherever you put her, yeah.
So pleasure and laughter at times is actually at the core of this, I find. Or
I think, yeah, I mean,
between people.
Exactly, it's a core of this because it's at the core of Saba's life, you know. I'm not trying to say like, or I shouldn't say I'm not trying to say what my characters, you know, it's not necessarily about Saba telling us like, okay, look, I'm in this really horrendous space, you know, I need to send a message by saying I'm gonna exercise my right to pleasure. I think the beauty is about how to be yourself in every situation possible.
So it's not necessarily a rejection of the situation that's being imposed on her, but rather a sort of continuing to exist.
Absolutely. I think that's the only thing you can do. Like I said, you know, there will be situations beyond our influence. But I think the only thing the power we have is about to allow ourselves this flexibility to learn, yes, to learn, to absorb, to read, but also to watch and also read ourselves, you know. It's fine you read my book or you read someone else's book, but I think you are a book. I think that's the most fundamental thing for me, what I discovered in this, writing this book is every individual is a book. And reading is just not about reading books. It's about reading the air, reading music, reading the stories in each other's eyes. And that's when you learn we are individual human beings made of details.
So coming back to Saba and her desire to live intensely and to experience intensely, I would call her a warrior of sorts. And there's a recurring image of the female warrior in your novel. And by using the word warrior, I don't necessarily mean people in conflict, people who go to war to battle in conflict, but rather, you know, like Saba in this case. That being said, there are a few references that you have made to warriors who are in battle. Like there's a photograph on Saba's wall, for example, of a woman, soldier, I think. There's also someone who's arriving to witness a trial that's held against Saba. So what is the political significance of this image, and how does it tie in with Saba's character?
I was brought up because my father died when I was 2, and my mother left when I was 3. So in Sudan, I was actually brought up by my grandmother, but also there were other women in the compound. And, and so like every day I left, I started my morning thinking when I grow up, I wanna be like my grandmother. Like I wanted to see the world through her eyes because she was extremely firm when she has to. But there's also gentleness and flexibility, and also the way she embraced fragility. It's really important. And those are the kind of things that you realize, when you grow up, people tell you those are the kind of sign of weakness, perhaps, that I saw in her were signs of strength. And that's the beauty for me, like, to be brought up by this particular woman. And so I think, like you said, the image of a warrior isn't necessarily someone who is engaged in a battle, because in one way or another, we are all engaged in battles every single day, and but it's and the whole book, it's about sure, women are at the center of this book, because women had been, without them I wouldn't be here, because it's my mom, when she left to work as a domestic servant in Saudi Arabia, and she saved me by sending money and taking us out of the camp, So there's a way to battle that I wanted to kind of, I look back and I think perhaps that was one of the reasons why, like one of the things that one of my characters said, when Saba says to this daughter of a woman fighter, she tells us something like, I think all women are fighters, we just have different battles. And growing up, really, I saw that, it's like, the whole system is designed to carry war against women on every single day. And I think the whole system of patriarchy, or the way I lived, also the way I grew up, and and so to see like the different definition, and I saw how women battle that kind of patriarchy in different ways. Like, I just give you a quick example. One day, there was a judge in our camp who said something about my grandmother, like, I think my brother beat his brother, sorry, his son. And so he said, what do you expect of boys brought up by women? And so, and the thing, and then I watched because then someone told my grandmother, and then I watched my grandmother reacting to it. She just put her her thobe, and she went to confront the judge. So she was enraged. After that, I don't think he said anything about her in that particular way. So there is that kind of seeing live action, and to be a woman in that particular environment was just to be an action hero, an action hero for yourself on every single day.
We might think that we're beyond at the moment, but I would like to read this anyway for the audience. You write, their chattering stopped when an 80-something-year-old woman, whose daughter and granddaughter had been martyred at the front fighting for our country's independence, arrived on her donkey. The animal brayed when the grandmother dismounted from its back. I stood and gave up my chair to this woman whose womb has once upon a time sheltered lionesses. I found that beautiful.
Thank you.
So we agreed that Saba is a warrior. Is that so? I would say so. And this might seem like a far-fetched connection, but I want to connect this back in the end, so bear with me, please. It's impossible for me to think about her trial. There's an important trial within this book, which I find if I tell too much about, perhaps you would like to capture a small fragment of that?
So the book begins by trial, where Saba, I told you the story between her and her brother and how responsible she feels. So in the camp, they kind of charge her with the crime that she actually slept with her brother. And that's the beginning of the story, and that's how it gives a kind of window to the camp's life. Yeah.
But we've also understood from what you told us that this also, in part, could come from her sense of responsibility towards her brother. This intimacy, the intimate relationship between them. So it's impossible for me to think about this trial against someone who is trying to just exist in this context, without connecting it to what's happening on this side of the Mediterranean. And one example is Sara Madriani's trial. She is a Syrian activist and competitive swimmer, and she and her sister both crossed the sea to seek refuge here in Europe. And she was taken to court in Greece for saving people's lives at the shores. So there's clearly a dissonance between those trials and the idea of letting people seek refuge and encouraging it, in fact. And in the scene of the trial, you write that grief is beautiful when it is worn by people as a pretense. As a pretense. Can you please expand on that?
I don't really remember why. I mean, like I said, it's a really good question, but I don't think I would know how to kind of expand without, I think there's a way of when we see the world, I think we are all, in a way, brought up to see the world in a very specific way. I think we all think we are free, but really, if you look deeper, I wouldn't say we are free. I think we are on a path to freedom. I'm talking about individual freedom. Like, there are things that stop us from realizing our true selves. And this is not, and you need to understand, I kind of told myself, I need to understand that most of them, yes, they've been things that I've acquired as I grew up, but also there are things that told to us on a day-to-day basis how to exist, how to be, If you find yourself, to leave one country to another, for example, people think, you're coming to acquire a new life, but you're just exercising your freedom in this world, because what you're doing is you're looking at your own world and you think maybe, it's just we all create our own path and we just walk in those paths. Some of us, unfortunately, will die on the path. Some of us, will realize that we are on the path. And I don't think freedom is really, it's like something I recently wrote about, like, here in the West, for example, I came to the West, I think, quite free. The West didn't free me because I've already discovered literature. And I think when you discover reading, when you discover the world, when you discover, when I was in Saudi Arabia, for example, I was reading smuggled literature from all over the world, Jewish, Christian, even though I was told those people, like, you shouldn't like, So I read those people's literature, like Thomas Mann, Virginia Woolf, and I came with, I think, on no path to freedom, right? So I think what I'm trying to say is, like, the way we define love, the way we define sex, the way we define gender, the way we define our relationship with each other is actually an inbuilt thing. And the more we kind of depart from those kind of really hardcore definition, that's when I think we are on the path to freedom, because it's not an easy way, And also it's the way, like, the way, for example, we grieve for each other. Like sometimes, a sadness will happen in someone else's life. And I think there's a beauty to letting that person go through the grief, I think. Or sometimes I think there's also a beauty to grieving with people. And I think that's what I was trying to say. I don't know what exactly kind of pushed me to write those things, because, like I said, I'm really unconscious. But I think when I look back, I think writing is like a song. That's why we played Cesaria Evora at the beginning, because every single book, she was part of it, And Kalaf was telling me which one, and which song do you want me to play? And I just said, I don't care any song, because I just want to be in her throat. Because that's the idea for me of Cesaria Evora, someone who has a throat, who gives birth to different possibilities, be it love, be it grief, be it art, be it sensuality, you know, and I know I'm an intense writer, but I think she's an intense singer. So so there's that kind of connection, I think, between your question and the way song inspired. I don't know.
No, that's wonderful that you mentioned the throat, because I mean that is also an instrument in the creation of be it literature or be it acting. What relevance does it play for you, Martha?
Well, I mean, just with words as well as with the throat, you can give every word a certain color. When you read a text or when you read any words, you can change the tone and you change the word and the intensity behind the word with it. So even with the writing, depending on if it's more humorous or more serious, it gives it a different color, even though the words are the same. And you can do the same thing with throat or with the tone. How you say something in more sarcastic, more serious, more humorous. So, you know, there are millions of varieties, and that's a perfect tool.
It's like, I think so. Like in Ethiopia and Eritrea, for example, some women, for example, they tattoo their neck. And for me, it was like, when I first saw it, it was like, wow, this kind of sign of sensuality, you think, almost, you know, but then it could be a symbol of so many things, you know. It could be like, just, you know, it's almost a throat, like how you express yourself, but also how you love yourself, you know. It's also like how you convey those kind of different stories that you carry within you, you know. I know we're getting like very arty-farty here, but, you know, I really think like there's nothing more beautiful than hearing a song, so.
Absolutely. And you've been known to create playlists to accompany, at times, your writing.
I think I wanted to be a singer, but I failed. And I wanted to be a poet, and I failed. So I think like I'm those two inside me, you know. And I think some people read my work and they say, oh, it's like very poetic. And also, I wanted to be a dancer, and I dance all the time. I mean, when I was writing this book, I was going through horrendous insomnia. And, you know, at night, so I started teaching myself how to dance ballet, for example. Or I tried, you know, that I know how to dance. But, you know, because I just didn't want to feel sorry for myself being in my room, you know, at 3 a.m., not being able to sleep. And I said, like, let me give music to my body. And then what I discovered is the more you feed your body with music, with dance, like Pina Bausch, Bausch, yeah, she's, you know, I've been watching, for example, she's got this dance, The Fall. I've been watching it for the past maybe 4 or 5, no, actually since I saw it, I think in Almodovar film, I mean, that's when I encountered her first. That was like, anyway, years. I've been watching just the dance at night, in the middle of the night, and try to kind of, you know, and that's what gives power to your words when you sit at your desk. Without you realizing, the more you dance, the more you give your body that kind of music, the way you embrace sadness, sorrow, happiness, you know, and the way you make love also changes, or the way you see the world also changes, and the way you see yourself also changes. And so I wrote this piece now. My last essay was called The Art of Making Love to Yourself. And I realized, like, we are obsessed with making love to other people, but at the same time, we forget, like, we can be our greatest lovers, you know.
I love how that connects back to the intimacy of the tattoos on the neck, for your own sake rather than for the sake of the viewer, and how also how experiences are inscribed in the body, and the release, the entanglement that can come from listening to music or experiencing movement. That's beautiful.
Sorry, go.
No, please carry on.
No, I was just saying, it's just the kind of details that make up the story, and we are story carriers. We are story carriers, not of what we hear, but of our own stories.
Absolutely. So, just to connect back, we've made a circle here, I find.
Right.
And maybe we can come back to Jamal, for example. So he not only observes, but he also meets and interacts with the people that are framed in his screen. And he sees the intimacies of their lives. For example, the masturbation scene, as you mentioned, or other scenes where someone's painting their nails, or really intimate details. He sees their lives almost in full, I would say, because there's always that perspective that the person who's experiencing it has, right? So he sees their perils and their crimes, and still he treats everybody, highlighting crimes here, he treats everybody with the same generosity and welcomes everyone to his cinema, allows them in. Why is that, and where does he get that strength?
I think, this is a really good question, because I think, and that's why I was talking, I was talking about art, and literature, for example. And we haven't, I think, realized yet the power of those kind of mediums, right, in our lives, and how they can, they can basically make us see ourselves and the world anew every single day, or every single hour, every single second, every single minute. But we are the drivers of our own change, right? And I think for Jamal, we were talking with Martha at the beginning. When he comes, when he came to the camp, he, so he lived with different people. He lived with a poet, he lived with a molester, he moved with a pedophile, he lived with somebody who cheated, but also someone who was, a widower, someone who was like, kind of craving or longing for that kind of touch and sensuality. And so in his life, he encounters all these people, and it's just like we are, when you look at it, at like what potentially there is for all of us to be, there's so many things that lead us to become one particular thing. It's not just one thing. So if someone commits an act of crime, it's really important to kind of understand why we got to that place where we got, and that's the complexity of our complexities as human beings, So we come from Horn of Africa, 3 of us here, and we know, for example, there is a situation back home, but we know it's so complex. But yet again, it's like those are part of our stories, and those are like what make us the way we are. And I think, when we see each other, sometimes we just see the past, and sometimes we forget, like, we also have stories of, to be told.
Thank you so much.
My
I want
pleasure.
to thank you both for being here. We've now come to an end, and if there's anything that you would like to add?
No, actually, it's an honor to be with you too, really. Yeah, a whole panel of Horn of Africa. I'm really proud.
I'm very happy to be here. And thank you, Martha, as well.